Howdy, y'all. My name is Dr. Jeff Jarvis. I'm the EMS Medical Director for Williamson County and Marble Falls Area EMS in Central Texas. I'd like to talk to you about how we train our paramedics to use the King Vision video laryngoscope. Let me give you some background information on how we develop these techniques, because while some of them will seem obvious, some may seem counterintuitive. And I want you to know that we have some good evidence that these techniques work. I began looking for alternatives to direct laryngoscopy in 2012 after crunching some numbers and realizing we were not doing a very good job of intubation. Based on my experience with video laryngoscopy in the emergency department, I felt like some form of VL device was going to work for us. We selected the King Vision laryngoscope based on its price, the availability of a channeled blade, and our experience with it during our mannequin, cadaver, and field trials. We also did an analysis of each intubation attempt with the King Vision during these trials. We used the information from this analysis to refine the method we use to teach our paramedics how to use the device. We've been using it now for about a year and a half and have seen a marked improvement in our intubation success. Before implementation, our first pass success with direct laryngoscopy was 43%. Our first pass success for 2013 using the King Vision exclusively was 83%. To give you a little perspective, there was a nice registry study published by Dr. Sagarin in Annals of Emergency Medicine in 2005, and it showed a first pass success among emergency physicians of 83%. While we're not yet satisfied with our performance, it is definitely a marked improvement over where we began. I'd also like to say that while I'm a big fan of the King Vision laryngoscope, I have no financial interest in this product or any of the associated companies. I'm not being paid or reimbursed in any way for doing this video. I'm doing it because I believe in the product, and I know that when used appropriately, it certainly helped us take better care of our patients, and I'd like to help other departments learn from our experience. Perhaps the most important thing I learned about using this device is that video laryngoscopy, at least with this and similar devices, is that it is not the same skill as direct laryngoscopy. Using the King Vision, just like you would a direct laryngoscope, is asking for failure. There are certainly some similarities between the two, like preparatory steps and oxygenation, the anatomy, for example, but the actual psychomotor skill of how to use this device is fundamentally different. Most of our initial failures was because we didn't understand this distinction. With that in mind, I'd like to briefly review the differences between direct laryngoscopy and this type of video laryngoscope. So direct laryngoscopy is a displacing technology. That means it's used to displace the soft tissues and mandible out of the way and create a visual access, direct line of sight between the vocal cords and your eyes. There's a specific motor movement that's needed to move this tissue. It involves lifting these structures up and away from you. There are some displacing video laryngoscopes that mimic these same movements, but they just add in a camera to get you a better view. King Vision's not one of these. Non-displacing technology, however, uses a blade that's curved specifically to slide under the soft tissues and the mandible and to place the lens of the camera, or your digital eyes, right in front of the vocal cords, so you don't have to displace these tissues. In fact, attempting to lift the structures out of the way as you would with a displacing blade is actually one of the most common reasons our paramedics ended up with failed intubation attempts. Non-displacing devices are designed to be rotated into place. Understanding this difference led us to use the device, and in fact hold the device, differently and ultimately be more successful. Most research with non-displacing technology demonstrates that you get a superior view compared to traditional displacing technology. The difficulty then becomes getting the actual tube to go where you want it to go. In order to address this, you basically have two options. You can either use a specially curved stylet or a channeled blade that will hold the ET tube and direct it through the vocal cords. So the King Vision is available in both blades, but we use the channeled blades exclusively. We found they offer several benefits. First, they allow us to preload the ET tube and have it ready to insert as soon as the view is obtained. They also free up a hand since you're now manipulating the blade and the tube simultaneously with the same hand. This allows us to use our free hand to suction if we need it. I'd now like to share the method that I use to teach our paramedics to use the King Vision. We now use this device as our exclusive method of intubating adult patients. So now I'd like to go over some specific techniques that we teach. First, let me explain what these wires are. So they're here to allow us to capture this video. These wires are not present in our field units. In fact, these are one of the reasons that we went with the King Vision. Other devices required us to plug into a display, and we found we were constantly tripping over those wires. So the biggest difference between how we teach this device and how other systems may use it is how we hold it. So rather than hold it up here using this very nicely designed handle, we have our medics hold it very lightly at the base, right where the channel joins the blade. So there are two reasons for this. First, we found that when we held the device high up on the blade, right up on the handle, it was relatively easy for us to accidentally dislodge the head of the device, and that would cause a loss of video signal. So holding it low keeps our hands far away from the head and prevents this dislodgement. Although like other systems we did experience this problem of knocking the head off, we haven't had any further incidents since we changed how we hold the blade. So it's very natural to hold the blade high, or hold the device high up on the blade. It feels right, feels comfortable, and probably most importantly, it feels like a traditional laryngoscope that we learned with. So when I hand a King Vision to anyone outside of our system, including my emergency physician colleagues, they pick it up exactly like this. So unfortunately, we found when holding the blade like this, it maximizes the risk of inserting the blade too deeply into the oropharynx. When this happens, the medic almost universally tells me the same thing. I had a great view of the cords, but I just couldn't get the tube to pass. So based on our experience, I know when I hear this that they went in too deeply. And they were almost certainly holding the blade way high up on the handle. So let me demonstrate what I mean. First, I'm going to demonstrate the natural approach to holding the blade, way up like this. Although I'm not trying to do this, the tip of the blade inadvertently goes in too deep, and now I've completely lost sight of the epiglottis. I still have a great view of the cords right there, but sadly a great view of the cords doesn't do the patient any good. So as I try to advance the tube, what I find is that the tube goes too posteriorly, and we end up with a great view of an esophageal intubation. So now let me demonstrate how I want our medics to hold it. Again, we hold it lightly. We try to avoid that death grip we frequently see with direct laryngoscopy, and we hold it low down on the blade. Notice how my thumb is right at the junction of the channel and the blade. So doing this, when I insert in like this, it allows my thumb to lightly touch the patient's lips, and that's roughly the appropriate depth for most patients, give or take a little bit. So this is what we call the view. The most important part of the view is the full midline epiglottis. In traditional terms, you want a Mac view, not a Miller view. You want the tip of the blade just into the vallecula. Obtaining this view has rather dramatically decreased our miss rate, and this definitely was a lesson we learned the hard way. So in retrospect, it turns out that this is something that's been known for quite a while. Dr. Richard Levitan has been teaching the value of epiglottoscopy. Hopefully he's been teaching how to pronounce that also. That's a tough word. Epiglottoscopy for years. And we found that doing this particularly is important with these non-displacing video laryngoscopes like the King Vision. So here are the parts of the view. So we see the top part of the screen, and I probably ought to talk about this. The top part of the screen is actually the tip of the blade. And while this may seem obvious, I point it out because, well, in typical Aggie fashion, I thought the screen was broken the first time I picked it up. So the next thing you see is the epiglottis. Now, seeing the epiglottis is such an important point that we don't even attempt to pass the tube if we don't see the full epiglottis. So then we have this gorgeous view of the cords. And when you pass the tube, it goes right where you want it to go. So now let's look at the benefit of this channeled blade. Because this is not a displacing laryngoscope, it isn't designed to lift the tissues out of the way. It's not designed to create a direct line of sight between the cords and your eyes the way a direct laryngoscope does. Instead, it's designed to curve around those tissues and, in essence, put your eye directly in front of the cords. It's the point of the camera there. And this almost universally gives an incredible view. The challenge then becomes getting the tube to go where you want it to go. The channel helps guide the tube around the tissues and up through the cords. Although there is an unchanneled blade available to use with the King Vision, we don't use it. We only use the channeled blades. And for us, this avoids the requirement to use a specially curved or designed stylet. Now, I'm a big fan of simplicity in stressful situations like, say, field intubation. So the fewer parts we have to use, the better off for me. So we preload a tube into the channel. Now, we lubricate it up first, and the lubrication helps the tube slide through the channel a little more easily. We also advance the tube to where it's flush with the distal tip of the channel, but not extending past it. Now, the reason we do this is that the further past the tip of the channel the tube gets, the less directional control the channel has on the tube. Now, the other benefit we found with preloading the tube like this is that it frees up our hand, our right hand, to use with suctioning. We can now suction simultaneously while intubating, and have found this to be a big help. So with direct laryngoscopy, it's very difficult to intubate and suction simultaneously, and that's for two reasons. First, your right hand is busy trying to pass and guide and direct the tube. And second, the suction catheter, because you need that direct line of sight, the suction catheter is obstructing your view of the cords. So let me demonstrate how this isn't the case with the King Vision. So I'm going to start by suctioning. So I'm suctioning here, and then I'm just going to go leave that Yankauer in place. And now I'm going to insert the King Vision. And I go ahead, I slide in, and I obtain the view I want. And I'm doing this only with my left hand, and I'm continuing to suction. And as you can see, I have a great view. I have the view I'm looking for, but I can't even see the suction tip. So now I briefly move my hand from the suction over and advance the tube through the cords. The suction catheter didn't obstruct my vision at all. So now the final advantage of video laryngoscopy that I'd like to point out is that you can have multiple people visualize the tube passing through the cords. This really has helped our medics have more confidence that the tube is in the trachea. Plus, I got to tell you, it's a real crowd pleaser with the first responders. Everybody likes seeing this. So we actually require that at least 2 people visualize the intubation for confirmation, and then that's obviously in addition to the typical verification forms of waveform capnography, breath sounds, etc. So I'd like to demonstrate again both the wrong way and the right way to use the King Vision. So I'm going to go ahead and get the tube preloaded, and I'm going to hold the device like I would just any other device, and like most people are likely to pick it up. So I hold it up using the handle. I go in, and what I find is I didn't try to go in too deep, but I did. I went in too deep. And I see a pretty good look at the cords, but when I try to pass the tube, it goes posteriorly. So that's how we do that, what I would call the wrong way. Now, it is certainly possible that you can go in, you go too deep, and just back out until you get the right view, but it turns out to be harder to do when you're holding it up on the handle. So instead, we'll demonstrate one more time what the way the Williamson County paramedics and the Marble Falls paramedics do this. We hold the device low and light right where the channel meets the blade. We insert midline without sweeping the tongue. We go in, we get the view, we have a great view of the epiglottis, and we slide the tube in place. So next, I'd like to cover a bit of troubleshooting. I'm going to go over the most common scenarios we've encountered. So the first is that, let me get the tube out here, the first is that the patient is too large and the blade won't fit in the mouth. Now I realize this isn't a problem anywhere else, perhaps it's just endemic to Central Texas, but we have some pretty large patients. And because the blade is large, we have to go in like this, and if their chest is too large, it gets in the way of the camera. This is also a challenge when you're doing compressions and intubating during CPR. So the approach that we take is basically decapitate and use a headless approach. So we take the head off, insert the blade in, we turn on, and then we get our view. So now the next thing I want to talk about is the medic says, "Doc, I had this perfect view of an esophageal intubation." So again, almost without fail, what happened is he was in too deep. He needs to just back it up a little bit. Not only was he in too deep, he was probably holding the blade way up at the handle. So let me show you how that works. Again, holding it here, I go in too deep. I have a good view of an esophageal intubation. All right. Now, the next is just a little subtle issue here. So the medic goes in, we get the view, but it turns out the medic will say, well, I have this great view, but the tube just keeps going too far laterally. So let me demonstrate what that looks like. The tube just won't turn. So what you need to do in that situation is just rotate the tube, back it up until you can't see it anymore, rotate around, just give it a little bit of English, and the tube goes right in. So the next comment that we get is, well, I was too deep, and I started to advance the tube and realized that I was too deep. I backed out a little bit. I now have the view, but I still can't get the tube to go in. So more than likely what happened is you overextended, you went ahead and tried to pass the tube. When you repositioned, you didn't reposition the tube also. So you need to back it up and try again. So let me demonstrate that. So they go in and they still manage to go, unintentionally go too deep. Before realizing it, they start to advance the tube. So they realize it's not going. They leave the tube. Instead of backing it up past the view of the camera, they leave it extended. Now they back the tip up. They get the view, but they try to advance the tube and it's still going posteriorly. So the solution is you need to back the tube up to where you can't see it anymore. Now there's enough of a bite from the channel on the tube for it to go right in. All right, so the next thing I hear is, well, I tried to intubate, but the airway was just full of airway goobers. So what do we do? Well, we've already talked about this, but basically go in and suction first and then continue throughout the intubation. And it really turns out to have a pretty profound effect. Once we cleared out the other issues of holding the blade and going in midline and not going too deep and getting the view, the big issue that we have now, we think we've resolved now, is that there are an awful lot of secretions in the airway. I think with almost any video device, if you submerge the lens of the camera into the secretions, you're going to get an obstructed view. So you can either do that, back out, wash off the tip of the camera with a saline flush, which doesn't take very long, or you can avoid the situation to begin with by suctioning early and then intubating. And as a matter of fact, what we do is we tell people that they actually have to suction before intubating. And it's not so much that I think all intubations require suctioning. I don't. It's that if I'm going to require suctioning, that means the suction equipment has to be available, it has to be turned on, it has to be in their hand. Since we've started doing that, I just don't hear about missed intubations because of secretions or blood. So I'd now like to end by summarizing the key points about how we teach our paramedics to use the King Vision. So the first thing is this is a different skill than direct laryngoscopy. We also have them pre-suction the patient if needed, but we always have the suction ready and available. We hold the blade low and light. We hold the tongue if needed. We use a midline insertion and we don't sweep the tongue. We use a headless blade for CPR and for patients with large chest. And again, what I mean by that is insert the blade first, then put the head on. We also don't advance the tube without first obtaining the view, showing that full epiglottis. Finally, we have a second person confirm direct visualization of the tube as it's passing the cords, in addition, of course, to all the other confirmation methods we use. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the lessons that we've learned with our adoption of this product. And finally, I'd like to reiterate that I have no conflicts of interest with this product, and I'm not being paid in any way. I just believe in the device, and I want to help other systems enjoy the same success we've had. Thank you very much for watching, and if I can be of any help to you, please feel free to email me at jjarvis@wilco.org. That's JJARVIS@WILCO.org. Thanks a lot, y'all.